Well, good afternoon and good morning, depending on where today finds you. I am Kevin Collins, the AE Program Leader here at Victor, and looking forward to a quick hit topic on some changes to our program and how we might be able to connect that to your business. And I'm happy to be joined by
Jake Terrell. I'm the business development leader for the design construction consultant program, as well as I manage the South region for business development for all programs within Victor.
Thanks, Jake. And thank you again to everybody as we kind of journey through a little bit of a deep dive on the expansion of this coverage and how you as a broker can connect more effectively to your A&E clients, both proactively and within the marketplace as well. So to get started, this is a listing of our 2020 changes that we've made. For those that joined us last time, we focused in on the use of the defense outside the limits endorsement, especially for small firms as they try to manage through their deductible piece. But Jake, quick question to you is just in your general travels in your territory and talking to brokers, what do you find as the areas of interest from the community and dealing with clients?
Well, I would say by far the most questions myself and our distribution team get is the interest in deductible selection and the use of outside limits as coming up most frequently. But what we find the most valuable discussions center around our expansion of insured. It most directly helps the businesses and how they consider solving for some real problems in today's environment.
Great, thanks for that feedback. That kind of syncs up with the conversations that I've had both within the association network and talking to brokers as well. Is you're trying to align around the right terms and conditions for the client and balance out the value of the premium to the coverage that you're trying to get. But I agree with you in retrospect that once we start to get into this topic of how the definition of insured has expanded and how firms can think about that proactively in their business, it really transitions the conversation from the broker to client level, and not so much around the insurance policy itself, but overlying to the business that can lead to broader discussions depending upon the coverage or areas of expertise and counsel that you're providing to the firms. So with that, that's where we're going to focus today, is on the expansion of the definition of insured under the policy and who's insured, and how firms and brokers can tie that more effectively to the future needs of the firm. So to get us started, what I want to highlight is really a carve out of the definition from the policy. So what the extension of the coverage did was introduce the idea of contracted personnel. So you can see a little bit on the underlines, a few of those key pieces. Any person talking about direct control and supervision of our insured, the named insured, and how they're operating, and also those that come up during the policy period. From a historical spectrum, I think it's important to highlight that we've been writing this coverage now for over 65 years, but I would say through the decades, this definition has expanded as firms have looked to build out their colleague base in different frameworks. So, it's always been past or present colleagues, employees, principals, partners. In other words, those individuals that were providing professional services in the past or currently have always been covered under the policy. But in the 90s, we added coverage around leased personnel, recognizing that you may have a third-party provider that's leasing part-time employees that are under your direct supervision and control, and that became pretty common in the marketplace. This is kind of that next iteration to try to address 1099 employees, or the differentiation of how you're bringing individuals to upscale the projects with the clients that you're working with. So with that as context to the coverage that's being provided, let's talk about it in a couple different ways. So really what we're talking about is an offshoot of the gig economy. Whether it was accelerated during COVID, but even pre-COVID, you had a existing job base that didn't necessarily want to work full time for an architectural engineering firm. At the same time, a lot of our clients were dealing with longer term costs of full-time employees in a fluctuating market as projects came aboard quickly and also decreased down, much like in 2009 to 2011 with a bit of the financial collapse and the pullback on a lot of projects that were going into it. And we're really just trying to meet the need of the clients in this area. You know, absent this coverage, what you're left with is a proactive endorsement that somehow addresses the individual that's working with you on this project to be able to be under the envelope of coverage as to who's an insured. So within the expansion, what we're trying to do is provide a little bit more of omnibus language that directs the coverage proactively and allows the firms to be able to make the decision. So a couple pieces on this. One is, within that definition, we do key in on the word person. So this is a separation from a corporate entity or another architectural or engineering firm that you may hire around that, and we'll talk in more detail around the specifics of that. The other key element of this definition is that it needs, that individual has to be under your direct control and supervision. So if you're signing and sealing the drawings, if that individual is part of the design discussion, but you're ultimately signing and sealing the drawings, then that essentially puts this individual in a similar line as another principal or partner or colleague or employee of the firm around that. So why is that important? The reason that that's important is overlaid with what you find traditionally in the professional liability A&E space, which is that definition of vicarious liability. So vicarious liability says that as the prime design professional, you not only have responsibility under negligence theory for your acts or errors arising from your professional services, but you also have responsibility to those that you hire. So if you're an architect designing an office building, although you may not have expertise in the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, structural, civil engineering component, your design team is going to be part of that, where you're hiring a sub-consultant, legal entity, in order to provide those services. And although you have responsibility for coordination and to provide that in design documents to the contractor, they're not under your direct supervision and control. You are relying on the professional expertise and knowledge of that individual structural engineer, civil engineer, et cetera, to act in a non-negligent manner. And so that's the traditional basis of coverage. An insurance policy provides coverage not only for your professional services, but your vicarious liability arising from the professional services of the companies that you hire. What this definition does is builds out a second piece that you could have persons who are leased or contracted under your direct supervision and control in that case. So for instance, as an architect, you could hire an interior designer, or you could hire a project architect to come in to help you with contract administration or other design services. So again, under that definition, if that individual is a person and under your direct supervision and control, the practice policy, your base 12-month practice policy, can now respond to claims or allegations of negligence that may happen on those projects where you're utilizing those individuals. And again, absent that piece of coverage for contracted personnel, and if they don't fit into the definition of the vicarious liability, then as a broker, you would need to work with a current insurance carrier in order to endorse the policy to specifically reflect that. And that's really what we're trying to address, is to recognize that in today's environment, a lot of firms are trying to address how they manage long-term full-time benefits of colleagues as they build up projects or downsize, especially for smaller firms. And this gives them another vehicle of solution in that process. Jake, again, I know speaking to brokers across the country, and you were talking about this, you had highlighted a few areas of interest, and maybe you could share with the brokerage community kind of what you're hearing from their counterparts on this coverage and issue.
Yeah, so when we're out speaking and helping and talking about this particular coverage enhancement, some of the things that we talk about from a selling point, and the brokers come back to us with is, how it decreases the number of touches required when a firm brings on new talent. And we sit here, read through these real quick. Addresses flexibility of the needs of today's firms. Obviously, a lot of our merger and acquisition going on right now, and different things with how employees are classified. And there's fewer errors and omissions if a contracted worker isn't appropriate coverage. But when you really look at the broader theme of what these mean, it's just what we hear back is it's efficient way to have. It's more efficient to have the coverage than it is for a broker to have to come back and ask us for that, or to make sure they read through the policy to see if it's there. They've got a lot of confidence that it's already there in the policy, and it really helps them to counsel their clients on how they can upscale and downscale more efficiently in the changing market conditions. And really what that does is it provides the flexibility back to the firm to manage through the issues that they're having without having the constraints of insurance coverage or the unknown of whether it's there or not there.
Thanks, Jake. That's a good point. And I guess as I'm talking to clients too, some of the bigger themes that happen, which I think actually coincide with probably the broker challenges, is the need to respond quickly and effectively to requests for proposals on projects that acquire additional staffing. For brokers that handle smaller business, where they maybe less than 10, less than 5 individuals, the opportunity on one project may require a couple of additional people to be able to effectively manage that project, but is not part of their long-term growth strategy. So I find more often than not that these types of questions happen as often as you get for maybe a waiver of subrogation or a request for higher limit, or whether or not this individual is covered. And I think the satisfaction comes where you can point to the policy and say that the coverage is there. It really helps the client to be able to make the decisions quickly as to how they want to manage and effectively do that. But you as the broker also providing the solution in real time and not slowing them down from being able to respond to the RFPs. Historically, I have found that requests for projects, higher limit requests, and other things that the broker and the insurance carrier are often the last people to know in that process. So turnaround time is extremely key. I think also from a firm standpoint, it gives them greater flexibility in talent acquisition. The process for hiring full-time and going through that is definitely a longer window. I think that the gig economy has expanded a pretty good subset of designers or other industries of people that are highly qualified and quick to be able to respond to get the firms up and running. So again, it's another tool in the toolbox to be able to manage through that. And then from a long-term profitability or pass-through rate, it may provide the firm with a little bit more flexibility to manage through the costs, either as part of the bid or the fee process, to make sure that they're pricing the project to effective long-term profitability. And so that is super important now in kind of today's inflationary market, and also post-COVID. Universally, whether architects or engineering firms that we're talking to, everybody's saying that they're busy. They've got a lot of work to do and a lot of process, but everybody is working through that environment of blended. Nobody's in the office 100% of the time. Some people are remote, greater distances. Sometimes team building is going to put people in different parts of the United States connecting with that. So that ability to communicate and connect effectively, can be more of a struggle. And again, the ability to manage through that effectively and quickly is going to give firms a heads up and an opportunity around that. And the last thing that I would say is, at least within the strict A&E market, we introduced this coverage in 2020. We haven't seen a lot of markets that have picked up that formula. A lot of them have endorsements or may not have a stock area in order to assess that. So if you've got clients with other programs, this is also an opportunity to look at the policies proactively to see if this is already being addressed or if there's a way to proactively work with that around that. So who is this a target to? I guess the long story short is that everybody that we're talking to has got this in their quiver for consideration. So the good news is for those that have a broader market swath, whether it's size, larger accounts versus smaller accounts, you've got architects and engineers in your portfolio, both prime designers and specialists. This is an issue that every business is having to deal with and approach. So depending on your communication broadly to your clients, we have information available on our website around this coverage and also links for some of the issues that are raised by it. This is a good conversation starter, regardless of the firm that you're handling and being able to do it. So that's a good starter. This isn't an issue of regionalization. It's not more of an architecture versus engineering issue. It's not a small specialist versus larger firm issue. Everybody's addressing it. And what we also found, pretty proactively too, is firms have already addressed this. Oftentimes, a lot of firms have got this in their toolbox and are doing it, which then again reaffirms that you should check to the extent that you've got placement of policies with other carriers of how this might be addressed. You always want to prepare and make sure that you've got the coverage in place before that claim may come up. The last thing that I wanted to kind of share as far as how to target to is in your conversations with clients, especially if they've already taken this on, we're finding a couple different areas that firms are utilizing this. One is the individual who's being hired as an individual, but some people that they're hiring through this big economy, because of concerns over insurance or individual protection, have formed their own individual LLC. So some firms have attracted these individuals through hiring of their company, the LLC, which again, I think from our definition or process, we wanted to try to stay away from having to reactively address the name of the entity on the policy. But conversation with your clients is going to be able to lead to a better discussion point on how they may already be handling it, or the fact that they're considering or thinking about that and would love consulting feedback on the best approaches and some of the issues to be able to raise. So we did have one question through the chat that I'll go ahead and reiterate. And so the question was just, does your policy cover that person or just the firm that hired them? Also, what is the fine line between an individual person and a firm with several people? So to the first question, what this is really doing is bringing that individual that meets it as contracted personnel. So much like if an architectural firm designs a home in 2015 and a claim is made today in 2023, that individual project architect may no longer be with the firm. But under a traditional definition of insured, it does deal with past colleagues, past professionals, principals, etc. So both that individual that acted on your behalf in designing the home and the entity itself would be subject to coverage. This is the same concept, is that the individual that you're hiring that meets contracted personnel under your direct supervision and control, that individual would have protection under your policy, and the entity and everybody else, that was defined before would be able to have that coverage. So you bring all of the coverage for the professional services that you as an entity are providing on that project under similar coverage, and that individual is not outside of the loop or having to be sued individually. And there is a little bit of a fine line between an individual person and a firm with several people. What we find is the individual may bring in additional individuals, so the number is not the driver of that. But if they're hiring an entity, that entity has legal standing in and of its own. So from that standpoint, it would need to be endorsed or proactively dealt with. If the individual is trying to raise personnel by hiring, for instance, somebody in the gig economy that's got an LLC to be able to bring it in. But the biggest piece of the puzzle in separation is really that distinction that I mentioned between sub-consultants and contractor personnel. That architect may hire an interior design firm to help them with the design of the office building, and they're going to hire a specific entity, incorporated LLC, to be able to drive it, and using their expertise in order to come back with plans that integrate effectively for the company. From this coverage standpoint, it's really dealing with you hiring that one individual that is bringing the interior design professional experience under your banner, but ultimately you're going to be responsible under your sign or seal to that particular piece. We do have information on the website that gets a little bit into details, and I'm not a tax underwriter nor a tax attorney, but there is distinctions from the standpoint of how they are hiring those individuals from the standpoint of employees versus 1099, et cetera. Our intent in this coverage, though, is to define the fact that the direct supervision and control and using it as an individual. Just pause for another question.
Hey,
So
Kevin,
Jacob,
I've got one for you real quick. So, since the time this coverage has been introduced, because it's been a little while since we have introduced this, how have you seen firms, changed utilizing this coverage or managing their business?
Yeah, no, Jake, that's a good point, because I think anytime you launch a new coverage, and from our standpoint over the last few years, the opportunity or the conversation actually started, prior to that. So as we were talking to both our contacts within like the American Institute of Architects, National Society of Professional Engineers, and other associations, this issue came up. And so I would say in a pre-COVID environment, as we got into like the early teens to like 2015, a lot of the conversation was centered around virtual practice. Virtual practice meaning that individual firm did not have a footprint defined by office space or other locality, or maybe principals were spread out across the country and they were, meeting virtually within that piece. They were the early adopters to the gig economy and being able to upscale on projects and basically hire for project individual issues. And that was the driver initially of our coverage and trying to solve for that. But as we started to launch the project, the new coverage, what we found is that firms were well ahead of us in that thought process. And even traditional firms that very much had an office footprint, if not multiple offices, were balancing that question of managing overhead for full-time employees versus the short-term need on projects. And they were the first people to really jump on that piece. COVID definitely accentuated that element from the standpoint of ability to connect virtually or not having to be at a central home office location in order to practice effectively. And I would say from an owner's perspective too, that rein was loosened as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, going into the next couple of years. But the last thing that I would just mention is one thing that is continuing is firms are retiring, or first generation, second generation of ownership are getting to retirement age. And the question is, what's the plan for firm continuity? So some of these discussions are coming up within now, whether it's looking at mergers and acquisitions as a solution, or combining with another firm, or transitioning ownership, or changing dynamic from S corp to ESOP, or anything in between. As a broker, that would be another element of, I think, linked to this coverage and conversation, is if your firms are trying to battle through or manage through that continuity plan and what they need to do. Having this as a tool, or understanding it, I think is giving some firms flexibility in how they choose and be able to address that element. So as we kind of leave you on this coverage, this is definitely coverage that's embedded within definitions. So it's a deep dive into the policy. But I would say as a broker looking to specialize with this group or trying to open dialogue consistently with architects and engineers that are dealing through these issues, this is a great starter for all of your clients, whether it's, again, checking with the current policy with other carriers as to how the coverage is addressed, or for our clients, just reaffirming and noting it, and that may lead to additional conversation and connectivity as you create value outside of just the application process and the policy selection piece too. So with that, I think that's all the questions that we have. So again, I want to appreciate everybody's time. Jake, thank you for your time again on this. We'll be back to talk to you about some more of the other coverage limitations and how brokers can manage effectively with their clients to bring it to fruition and to raise awareness within your client base. But appreciate everybody's time and have a good day.